Okay, as we let people trickle in, we have got no shortage of topics for us to discuss today, as it has been a wild week of college football news. Whether we're talking recruiting, whether we're talking just quick theory crafting, there's a lot for us to get into. As I said, as people trickle in, we're going to slowly start on these topics. And as that topic or as the headline says, we're going to be kicking it off with some Texas recruiting because the Longhorns are hosting a mega weekend of prospects that, dare I say, they really need to land. And look, last year we talked about this as it pertained to the edge and inside linebackers for the Texas Longhorns. This year, we can continue that thought process with the edge. They'd certainly love some linebacker, but Anthony Hill was a huge addition for them last year, someone I'm very excited to see this year. And we'll talk about Anthony Hill through this process. But if you're asking me from the outside looking in, what I believe the most important positions for Texas in this cycle are, personally, it's defensive line, edge, linebacker. Now, luckily for the Longhorns, there's a lot of talent in this class at every single one of those positions. And we're going to start with a massive visit for the Longhorns. Colin Simmons, QWERTY, right on it. Denson, thank you for jumping in here today. Glad you could join us. We have got so much to talk about, my man. Big time video on Alabama, and the most important unit for the Crimson Tide in 2023 will be dropping soon, so be on the lookout for that, Denson. But look, QWERTY, you hit the nail on the head. There's no doubt the answer here is Colin Simmons. Colin Simmons coming off of a visit that had him go to the Alabama Crimson Tide, and we need to understand this. Though Alabama may not be the conventional leader right now, Alabama has an unprecedented streak of landing five-star edges. Alabama has been successful in the state of Texas. Alabama is one of those schools you can never count out. I'll riddle you this. If in 3 months we were to fast forward time and we were to hear that Colin Simmons had a top three of LSU, Texas, and Alabama, nobody bats an eyelash. Nobody. Even though right now Alabama's trying to make up ground, that's the power of the brand and what they've been able to do at that position that you're recruiting against. But as it stands, for Texas to get Colin Simmons after the Alabama visit, I think you love. He's already in the state. They've been able to establish that relationship. They can sell to him that you are at a position of need. You can say the same thing at Alabama, but then they can start bringing up that room for the Crimson Tide. The other day, we talked about that outside linebacker edge room for the Crimson Tide where they have stacked 4 or 5 5 stars waiting in the waiting room, just waiting for their opportunity to hit the field. So if you are Texas, if you are PK, you have the luxury of telling Colin Simmons, not only can you stay home, not only can you play your college football in the SEC, by the time you get here, we will be on the way to the SEC, but you can also come into our room where the path to playing time is more linear and we have a definite need for your position. If we are looking at this Texas defense, it ticks through those edge positions, the Jack and X linebacker position. I always reference this. Texas Homer has a phenomenal video on Pete Kwiatkowski. I'm sure any Texas fan who's here has already seen it, but even if you're not a Texas fan, if you love college football, I cannot recommend that channel enough. Once again, that's Texas Homer. And look, any video you watch, you're going to be more than satisfied with. I have rewatched that PK video several times because it is that good. Deep dive into the philosophy of PK, and it will help you understand why I talk about Colin Simmons first. Because for that PK defense, this is exactly what you need. Now, as I stated, we were going to talk about Anthony Hill a little bit. And Anthony Hill was a huge win for the Longhorns last year. And one of the most intriguing things about Anthony Hill is you watch the spring game, he's slotting inside, he's slotting outside, he's doing a bit of it all. And so that's absolutely a player where if you were asking me a true freshman for Texas that was set to turn heads, that's my answer. Anthony Hill. And this is coming from someone who Texas and Oklahoma fans will know I'm real high on Jonte Cook. Real high on Jonte Cook. I think he's actually going to make a name for himself this year in that wide receiver room, which is wild considering the talent in that room. Once again, guys, that's not to diminish the talent Texas has in that room. That wide receiver room at Texas is loaded. I just think Jonte Cook is that good. I got to watch him play live. I just think he's that good. But look, if we were to just end the conversation on Colin Simmons and just say, hey, Colin Simmons is the name to know at Texas this weekend. There are several other prospects, several other blue chip 4-star guys that they're pushing for, but Colin Simmons is the headliner. Texas fans would be over the moon. How could you not? How could you not? 5-star, top guy at his position that you have at a premium. But that's not the only big name that Texas has. We're talking Kobe Black, another guy in the state of Texas at cornerback, someone that Texas is trying to keep home, away from the likes of the Alabama Crimson Tide, away from the likes of some other SEC schools pushing. And you have a Dominic McKinley. And I started saying Jordan Ross too. Thank you, Cordy. Jordan Ross is there as well. Dominic McKinley is an interesting one. And we're going to jump into Jordan Ross, Cordy, no doubt. But this has all been leading up to the Dominic McKinley piece, because I talk about this time and time again. It's tough. It's not impossible. We can point to multiple examples of a Louisiana player being lifted out of the state of Louisiana. We can talk about it all day long. But we also have to acknowledge how tough it is to do that. Dominic McKinley is a guy that LSU wants really bad. Oklahoma, he's coming off of the Champ U barbecue weekend. And so once again, if you're a Texas fan, you'd rather have that visit where he's coming to the Longhorns, coming to Austin after Champ U barbecue. Recency bias is a very real thing, and especially in college football recruiting. So I think for Texas, being able to get Dominic McKinley in after the Oklahoma weekend bodes well for the Longhorns and their chances to try and make up ground here at a position of ultimate importance for the Texas Longhorns. And as Cordy points out, Colin Simmons isn't the only top-tier edge in attendance. Jordan Ross is there as well. So Texas has a big weekend this weekend. And for Longhorn fans, you're hoping that you're able to convert some of these, because Texas has started a little bit slow in the 2024 cycle, though I don't think it's anything to worry about. I've said this with Oklahoma. I've said this with Alabama. I've said this with multiple teams. I mean, you could basically take out the name of the team and say Team X. We're in June. Texas is currently ranked 61. Now, is that where you'd like to be? Maybe not, but you're in June. People are still taking their visits. I mean, you have nothing but time, opportunity, and space out in front of you to really be able to make moves in this class, and you're locked up in some big-time battles. So Texas recruiting will be okay, but this is a big weekend to start laying that foundation for some of these guys, or at least if you've already laid the foundation, try and start building that house atop that foundation. Sew up those relationships. This is something we're going to be talking about, especially on Monday's live stream as well. I'd like to get Nino. I'd like to get Steven. I'd like to get some of the Texas creators on, give us their opinions coming out of the weekend of what Texas needs to do, what Texas is looking for, and what's next for the Texas recruiting class. Another guy we haven't had the opportunity to talk about, Terry Busey, another 5-star athlete from the state of Texas, a luxury Texas has that Georgia has, that Louisiana has, the Florida schools, California. That state is always loaded with talent, absolutely loaded. And even though there are so many Division I schools in the state of Texas, they still have enough pull to get their fair share of guys. That's just the reality of the situation. And especially with the SEC move on the horizon, we know these prospects like SEC football. That's the reality of it. And now Texas can look at them and say, hey, we view ourselves as the premier brand in the state of Texas. And now we get to play in the premier league in college football. Why not? Why not? This is something that in theory I have stated, should help Texas recruiting and should help them a lot. So this weekend is big. I'm not saying that this is a make or break weekend for the Texas Longhorns, but in my opinion, there is no doubt that this weekend is a weekend where you're going to want to exit the weekend in a really good space. You're going to want to exit the weekend giving Colin Simmons something to think about. And if I had to sew up this segment where we're talking about Texas recruiting and put a bow on it, that'd be the bow. Give them something to think about. Give them something to where they can't deny what they've just experienced. Because if you give them something to think about, if you give them a reason why you're the move, you'll be in a good position. You'll be in a good position. Ryan Wingo would be a good pickup too. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a battle. The wide receiver class in the class of 2024 is a wild ride through and through. And the only reason, Cordy, why I'm probably not hammering Ryan Wingo a little bit more is because I think Texas's wide receiver room is already in fantastic position. Now, that's obviously not to say that you're going to forego wide receiver recruiting or that you're going to diminish recruiting the wide receiver position, but it's just an acknowledgement that the wide receiver recruiting and the wide receiver room is in a really, really, really good spot. And so it's no doubt interesting to see, but I'm looking at that Dominic McKinley. I'm looking at that Terry Busey just because he has that versatility. I'm looking at the Colin Simmons, the Jordan Ross, the Kobe Black. That's going to be big. No doubt about it though. A Ryan Wingo and his talent, if he was to say, "Hey, I'll pop to Texas," you're over the moon. And especially with right now there being a very big recruiting battle between Texas and Texas Tech. And if you know that situation, you know that situation. That's all I'll say there. But yeah, no doubt. Wide receiver is absolutely something we have to watch. The only reason that wasn't a premier name or one of the first names out my mouth is just because of need, the positional need. Texas and Sark, we know what he's done with wide receivers. We know his history utilizing wide receivers, and we know what he's stacked at Texas. So very interesting to see. This is something we're going to have to watch through the weekend. I wouldn't be surprised at all for Texas to move the needle for some of these prospects. Look, I have a lot of faith in this Texas staff. At the end of the day, I think this is a staff that if you were asking me, okay, Ty, what did you think about the Charlie Strong staff? What did you think about the Tom Herman staff and into the Sarkisian staff? This would be the staff that I thought has the best chance to really help the Longhorns. And it's not necessarily only because of Sark. It's because of a lot of the requisite pieces around Sark. I think they've established a great coaching staff. I think they're really establishing better connections with some of the kids in the state of Texas. And I think their national connections are going to be working out well with where some of these coaches have been. And I think it's no secret that I was someone who wasn't the biggest fan of the Herman staff. For many Texas fans, you'll remember right before Tom Herman was fired, I actually made a video saying Texas fans should be irate. And it was part of the people who saw it received it and they said, "Hey, we agreed." The other half, I got a lot of pushback from. Now, ultimately, I will die on the hill if I was right in that video. I truly do believe I was. Not in every aspect. I'm certainly not absolved from being wrong. Far from it. There's probably plenty in that video that if you were to counter me on, we could probably come to an agreement. But the general thesis was Texas fans aren't getting what they deserve. This is a program that has a proud history. This is a proud program in a proud football state with proud fans. And they're not getting the product they deserve. They're getting a lesser product. Then in comes Steve Sarkisian, and we have the turnaround we're experiencing now, which is why I am hopeful that this is a situation that will work out. So, Texas football recruiting, something we have absolutely got to watch. Shadow, thank you for jumping in here. So that's something we're going to talk about Monday more. But now we need to go, and we're going to go from Texas to a coast, specifically the West Coast, where the Elite 11 was going down this past weekend. A lot of top tier quarterbacks for us to talk about. But I want to focus on two names here. I've only been watching Texas since the 2009 BC. Hey, that's fine. I mean, if you're around my age or a little bit younger, that time frame completely adds up, right? Like I think the first college football games I really remember, it was before that, because like I said, I have the first college football game I ever went to. I have the program right here, the Cotton Bowl with Nebraska and Auburn, because my dad was a big time Nebraska fan. He knew me being a big time Bama fan. He's like, "Hey, I can get my son on the Nebraska train as they play Auburn," because my mom and I were the Bama fans. And so, yes, first game I went to, Cotton Bowl, Auburn versus Nebraska. Keep that right by me right here. But that's not a problem, Shadow. If you're younger than me, I mean, that would make sense. I'm 28. So yeah, that time frame could easily make sense. But and guys, don't feel free to comment. You already know what this is. Through the Haze is a bit more structured, but as we're moving between topics, I love the fan interaction. That's absolutely here to stay. So by all means, continue to comment, continue all the great conversations there. But back to the Elite 11, Julian Sayin takes home Elite 11 MVP. Now, if you watch the Bama Standard, which is a great channel featuring a ton of Alabama Crimson Tide content, a ton, of Alabama Crimson Tide content from guys such as Bo Scarborough, Trent Richardson, Marvin Constance. I mean, you're getting content from the mouth of some greats. I am privileged and lucky enough to be featured on one of the shows Tuesday evening, The Final Whistle with Matt Caddell, Justin Riley, Chris James, Dan, The Final Whistle, Coach Smook. Awesome, awesome, awesome time. Awesome time there. So if you ever tune into that, we were talking about two positions that I felt like were must land for the Crimson Tide. Riddick was my first answer on the defensive side of the ball. He's a 5-star in-state. We know what Georgia is doing on the recruiting trail right now, and not only the recruiting trail. It'd be one thing if it was just landing top 5 classes, landing top 3. They're converting. They're converting these top 5 classes into championships, into first-round picks, exactly what you hope to be done. They're doing it. Coming off back-to-back, they're in a really good chance to three-peat. Three-peating is incredibly difficult. I'm not claiming they will, but they have a very friendly schedule. The other prospect, though, I felt like was must land was Julian Sayin. Of course, you need to get Riddick and flip him from Georgia. That's the last thing you want is the Georgia Bulldogs having a 5-star linebacker from your backyard, especially when you're Alabama and you want to take down Georgia. That can't happen. But Julian Sayin, Alabama at the end of spring brings in another quarterback. Inevitably, that poses more questions than answers. Now, you can get more answers if Tyler Buckner takes the job, right? If one of those guys really start to ball out, you can find the answers. But initially, there's more questions than answers. So Julian Sayin was a must-land prospect for me. He comes in Elite 11 MVP. And when you hear people talk about Julian Sayin, he blew them away. There were people that thought like he was just a really, really low or high floor quarterback. I'm sorry. That was a word on Julian Sayin. Like, hey, this cat is someone whose floor is super, super high. Meaning whenever he comes in, you're going to be getting a guy who we feel like is super college ready. Now, the knock was that he might not have the ceiling of some of these other quarterbacks. His floor will be higher, meaning we think he's more college ready, but he might not have the ceiling of some of these other quarterbacks. I think people are viewing him differently after Elite 11, where they say, hey, his floor is really high. His ceiling is really, really high. Julian Sayin, very, very great prospect. But there was another quarterback there, and we need to talk about because Dylan Raiola is making headlines. Not for the Elite 11, in which he was one of the top guys every single day, proving that he was who we think he is. But now he moves from Arizona to Buford, where he will be playing his high school ball with Buford. And one thing we need to understand is that's a high school that other schools have been able to get a lot of talent out of. Alabama has been able to get a lot of talent out of Buford. And now Dylan Raiola, the number one player in the nation, the number one quarterback in the nation, and a Georgia Bulldogs commit, is going to a high school within the state of Georgia that features not only KJ Bolden, but Edric Houston. That Buford team is very, very talented. And J.D. Backel tweeted out yesterday talking about, hey, you know, it's now 5-star Dylan Raiola, 5-star KJ Bolden, 5-star Edric Houston. And my question is, what's the most loaded high school team you can remember? I'm not claiming that Buford is, because I think I can think of some teams that are just as loaded, if not more. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't say that is a wildly talented team. Wildly talented. A team that comes to mind for me is that Denton Ryan team a few years ago. The team that featured Jatavian Sanders, Drew Sanders, Anthony Hill, and Bear Alexander. That team was wild. That's a team that would go up there for me. You have your IMGs, where pretty much everyone goes to college. You have your modern days, teams that recruit. So what is the most loaded team you can think of? It's interesting to think about, but Buford for me is certainly up there. It's something we have to think about. And I don't know. Here's the interesting thing about it, though. What Dylan Raiola means for Georgia now is that they now have an ace recruiter. I'm sorry, my voice is going. Dylan Raiola means for Georgia that they now have an ace recruiter in the state. That's huge for the Georgia Bulldogs. Absolutely huge for the Georgia Bulldogs. They have had talent leaving that state, whether it's Florida coming and grabbing top tier players from Georgia, whether it's Alabama coming and grabbing top tier players from Georgia, whether it's LSU, you name it. And now they have the number one quarterback in the nation who's going to be at one of the best high schools in the nation. Now, the flip side of this, something that isn't being discussed because everybody's talking about, hey, now Dylan Raiola is going to be able to recruit some of the best players in the nation that are currently in the state of Georgia, who Georgia really wants to stay home. The flip side is he is going to be facing a level of competition he has not seen yet. That's just the truth of the matter. If you take his league in Arizona and compare it to what he will be playing in Georgia, that league in Georgia is serious. I mean, he will be playing some teams down there, man. Some really good teams. If I'm a Georgia fan, I love that. If I'm a Georgia fan, that fires me up. I talk about it with guys coming from IMG. I talk about it with guys coming from modern day. These guys are battle tested. And if you're battle tested, I think that difference of the college game and the high school game, it's lessened. You can make that transition much easier. So Dylan Raiola, absolutely something we have to watch. Being on the move, moving from Arizona to Georgia, what that means for the Georgia Bulldogs. Also, people were wondering whether or not the Texas Longhorns, or I'm sorry, not the Texas Longhorns. Cordy, your Texas symbol got me as I was reading the chat and talking at the same time. I apologize. Not the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Many were wondering whether the Nebraska Cornhuskers would be able to get back in this battle or not. With him going to Georgia, it seems like that may be a done deal. B Sharp says, glad you stayed home. Hey, Roll Tide, man. Absolutely. Glad you're here. Zoom Doof says, just got here. What do you mean in the title? Why can't OU land a 5? Yeah, we're going to talk about that, man. Why can't Oklahoma land more 5-star offensive linemen? Because that's one area that has been a big question for me. We're going to talk about my theory there here in a little bit. Shadow says, I'd say most 5-stars choose where they go based on relationships. So it's not that OU is down or has had bad O-line coaches, but they've either gone to specific coaches or teams that won natties recently. Yes, and no, Shadow, because Texas just pulled an incredible offensive line class. And as much as I love Kyle Flood does not have the history of Bill Bedenbaugh in terms of getting guys paid in the NFL, and Texas hasn't won a natty recently. Now the relationships part, that's a great point. That right there, no doubt about that. I completely agree with that. But I do think there's something else. I think there's something else that we need to get into. But the second part, Zoom, it's just that the title, I'm only able to have 100 characters, so I can't put everything I want. The second part of the title would have been Zoom, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. They're setting up Juju versus Dylan for Georgia State. That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome. Cordy, yeah, Thursdays at 11 is now going to be through the Haze. So look forward to that every Thursday at 11. Today, my voice is all over the place and I'm barely getting through. So we'll see. Chris says Bradenton in Florida IMG is by far the most loaded. I think 3 5-stars in the next class. Yeah, IMG is always one of them. David says Bill B has put money in the NFL. Yeah, no doubt about that. His rate of development is insane. This gets me into this conversation. Why can't OU land more 5-star offensive linemen? And this is an interesting conversation to be had. There's a guy Oklahoma was recruiting, Max Anderson, who, if I'm not mistaken, was at Champion Barbecue. He just recently committed to Tennessee. Now, Oklahoma has gotten some top-tier offensive linemen. That's not my contention. We can look at offensive linemen that the Oklahoma Sooners have gotten, and there are several very talented guys. One of the things I've been most interested in is why they have not been able to convert the 5-stars. 1 second, guys. I have someone at the door. We will be right back. Sorry about that. Yeah, Cordy, the fiance, she heard my voice struggling and she brought me some tea. So now we can really get into this because I'm not going to be having a terrible voice. I apologize for all who suffered through that. We're good now. So, why can't Oklahoma land more five-star offensive linemen? As David has put in the chat, as we all understand, Bill Bedenbaugh is elite at offensive line development. There is no question there. Whenever we look at what Bill Bedenbaugh has done in terms of getting guys at Oklahoma and consistently sending them to the NFL draft, that's only part of the story. What they do once they get to the NFL, that's the other part of the story, where they are leading a charge and guys are getting paid hand over fist. So, if that's the case, why is it that Oklahoma has struggled landing five-star offensive linemen? And does it matter? That's a very important question here. Does it matter? Because we have this blue chip ratio, right, that we always look at. That a team has not won a national championship if they've been under X percentage of the blue chip ratio. And the blue chip ratio, in fairness, is a great indication as to a team's capabilities to make it through a season. It gives you a glimpse into depth. It's not the end all be all, but it certainly gives you a glimpse into depth. So if Bill Bedenbaugh consistently develops guys, consistently sends them to the NFL, and those guys do great in the NFL, then why is it that right now we look at a Michigan and a former Oklahoma alum? Let this sink in. Sharon Moore, one of the other guys we laud as being one of the best offensive line coaches in the nation, Sharon Moore is an Oklahoma alum who is killing it on the recruiting trail. So over the past week, over the past 2 weeks, over the past month, I've been sitting back thinking, why is it that Oklahoma doesn't land more five-star offensive linemen? Shadow, I love Kyle Flood. We've had this conversation multiple times. I absolutely put Kyle Flood as an ace offensive line coach and ace recruiter. Kyle Flood goes into living rooms and he converts. He does. It's the name of the game for him. So why is it a guy like Bill Bedenbaugh doesn't? And I've arrived at a conclusion. And that's why I asked the question, does it matter? And I could be wrong. This is just my opinion on the matter. And if you disagree, please let me know because it could maybe help us arrive at a different, better conclusion. My hypothesis is as follows. Bill Bedenbaugh does something unique from other offensive line coaches. In fact, I'm not saying he's the only offensive line coach that does it, but I don't know of another offensive line coach who does this one thing in particular. If you're going to play offensive line with the Oklahoma Sooners, you need to understand how to play left tackle. You need to understand how to play left guard, center, right guard, right tackle. Bill Bedenbaugh wants his offensive linemen to have the versatility to play every position along the offensive line. That self-selects a lot of guys out. For instance, if we look last year, the number one tackle in the nation, Caden Proctor. All right. No, I think it was actually Francis Mauanoa. It was Caden Proctor or Francis Mauanoa. Either one. Those guys have prepped for a tackle their entire career. It's a different type of pitch whenever you have a Coach Wolford telling Caden Proctor, hey, you've been a left tackle. We need left tackle. We need that help. As opposed to a Bill Bedenbaugh, who you want them to have the flexibility and the versatility to play every offensive line spot on the line. So it is my opinion that Oklahoma almost self-selects themselves out of a lot of these battles, which gets us into the second question, and honestly, maybe the more important question. Because does it matter? Does it matter that Oklahoma isn't landing the five-star offensive lineman at the rate of some of these other places? And history has shown us no, it doesn't. It's not mattering for Oklahoma. The interesting thing is this, guys. One of the things we talk about when we talk about Clemson, when we talk about Oklahoma, whenever we talk about Alabama, when we talk about Georgia, Shadow, I'm fairly certain Texas does something like this. I know Sark was doing it when he was at Alabama. Cordy, if y'all know, please let me know in the comments. They want to see you camp. They want to see you camp. All these recruiting sites, they have their top list, right? Let's just say the top 100. They all have their top 100. But at Clemson, at Bama, at some of these colleges, they don't care about any of these sites' top 100 lists. You camp, and the coaches fill out their top 100, top X, whatever it is. You get the point here. So for Bill Bedenbaugh, he wants offensive linemen that have versatility to play every position, and then he selects the offensive linemen that he thinks will fit in his scheme. This would be problematic if Oklahoma did not consistently churn out offensive linemen to the NFL. But they do. Every year we look up and another Oklahoma offensive lineman finds his way to the NFL. Simultaneously, an offensive lineman that was drafted 4 years ago is signing a contract extension. So you can't argue with his results. Goodness gracious, there is no arguing with the results. But it is of my opinion that Bill Bedenbaugh and the Oklahoma Sooners are after a very specific type of offensive lineman. And in the manner that they are after them, they're self-selecting a lot of guys out. So when we're asking the question, why does Oklahoma not land more five-star offensive linemen? I think the more appropriate question is, how many offensive linemen in every class are eligible for what Bill Bedenbaugh wants to do? In my opinion, that's a better question to be asking. How many offensive linemen every cycle does Oklahoma and Bill Bedenbaugh feel like they fit the criteria? Is it 15? Is it 20? 25? Because then the parameters of our conversation massively change. I mean, you've self-selected a large percentage of offensive linemen out. One thing we talk about as well, guys, I mean, I want you to think about, you're a left tackle. You've gotten so used to your whole career, your first step back is that left foot. And now you get to the college level. You just got done at Friday Night Lights blocking me, throwing me around. I'm all of 5'11", 185 pounds on a good day. You threw me around because I'm all my school has to play edge, and you're at left tackle. Now you go to Georgia. You got Chris Braswell coming off the edge, 6'5", freak in the weight room, right? And now you've moved to right tackle, where your step and everything is the complete reverse. Now you're stepping back right. That sounds small. That sounds really, really, really small. And that sounds like a change that you could just make, but it's not. That's not a change that you can just make. Some guys can, no doubt about that. Some guys can. For some guys, it takes a bit more. And for some guys, they don't want to hear, hey, you might be the number one tackle in the nation. We might ask you to play guard. You might be a left tackle. We might ask you to play right guard. How do you feel about that? For some guys, they're like, well, I have Alabama, Georgia, Texas A&M, all offering me at the position I want. So the more important question here is, does it matter that Oklahoma isn't landing these five-star offensive linemen? And the answer, until we're proven otherwise, is no. Would you like some five-star offensive linemen? Everybody would. Everybody would. I don't think there's a team out there that says no to that. But at the same time, if every year we look and we might have some questions, like this year, I have some questions about the Oklahoma offensive line. But do you know why it's hard for me to reasonably voice them without arriving at the answer myself? Because of Bill Bedenbaugh. Even though I have some questions about the Oklahoma offensive line, I look at the guys Bill Bedenbaugh has worked with. I look at the guys in the room and I think to myself, hey, that guy's figured it out every single year, and it's been a good offensive line. Like, I tend to think they will figure it out again because he's earned the benefit of the doubt. You can question, and that's fine as long as you acknowledge that history has shown there's an inevitable answer to that question. So why Oklahoma can't land more offensive linemen? I don't think it's that they can't land five-star offensive linemen. I think it's they're looking for something very specific, and that what they're looking for self-selects them out of a large percentage of offensive linemen, and that's why we see this. I think if there was a five-star offensive lineman who is completely comfortable with the versatility of playing everything, personally, I'm going to give y'all a name. I don't know that that was in the cards for him, but in terms of that versatility to play tackle or guard, Francis Malinoa last year at Miami now. Really think he's got a lot of versatility to his game. Really. I mean, I would not be surprised at all to see them slot him at guard, not because I think he's a guard, but because I think he's got the versatility to help them anywhere where they need help. Anywhere at all where they need help. That's what I think Malinoa brings. Cordy, you hit a great point here. Culture and scheme fit over just stars. 100%. That's a great summary. It's a great summary. Culture and scheme fit over just stars. The Oklahoma Sooners know what they want, they know what has worked, and you can't argue with what Bill Bedenbaugh has done. You can't. You just can't. That's not to say that, your team's offensive line coach isn't great. Sharon Moore, Eric Walford, Kyle Flood, Josh Henson. There's a lot of offensive line coaches that have shown us some stuff. Now, Josh Henson, still very interested to see what he does with the USC offensive line this year, but I must acknowledge and I must admit what he did with that A&M offensive line whenever it was so young. That was impressive. That was very impressive. That was an offensive line that in theory should have gotten eaten up. That was really the only reason they allowed A&M to do anything that year. Anything at all. Great comment, Cordy. Culture and scheme fit over just stars. And I think that's a perfect summary of Brent Venables. They know what they're and Bill Bedenbaugh, I'm sorry. They know what they're looking for, and they're not going to compromise on that because it works for them. So you can be a 5-star offensive lineman, but Bill Bedenbaugh has the history to say, this works for me, this doesn't work for me. And you got to let him do it because he's giving you results. He's giving you results. Love that, Cordy. And I think that's another reason, man, as we're winding down, just because my voice is all over the place, guys. I'm so sorry. I'd planned to go an hour, but I made 2 videos earlier this morning. I think my voice is just shot. But it's part of the reason why I'm so big on this Texas staff is because I think from a collection, you have a bunch of coaches that know what winning programs look like inside that Texas building. And same with the Oklahoma staff right now. I find there to be some parallels, actually. You have 2 staffs that have been inside winning buildings. They know what it means to go on championship runs, to win playoff games, and to sustain that level. Both those staffs know that. Culture and scheme fit over just stars. I love that, Cordy. That is the perfect way to end that segment. Guys, we're going to go ahead and get out of here because, like I said, my voice is just all over the place right now. Not sure what's going on, but I think this is a great place for us to end. I apologize that this week's Through the Haze was a little bit short. I'm going to try and do something next week for y'all to make up for it, whether that's bring on a guest or 2, extend this to an hour and a half, maybe a 2-hour live stream next week. That way we can make up for this. Let me know what y'all would like down in the comments. This is a show for y'all, absolutely, as always. It's going to be just like our Monday, Friday live streams, but a bit more structured with the fan interaction as always. So let me know what you would like for next week's episode. Once again, I apologize. My voice is just not working with me right now. And I don't want to sound too much worse for y'all. Chris says, I still can't believe Creed Humphrey fell to the second round. I know. He allowed like 3 sacks in his college career, worked out pretty good for the Chiefs. And this is exactly what I mean, Chris. We can ask why Oklahoma doesn't land more 5-star offensive linemen. We can ask it. It's a legitimate question. There's a legitimate conversation to be had. But I find the more poignant question to not be why they don't land 5-star offensive linemen. I find the more poignant question to be, does it matter? And right now, the answer is no. Great place to end today on. Thank you all for coming out. We'll see y'all on tomorrow for tomorrow's live stream. Can't wait to see you there. Until then, that's it. See you.